who you are.
I am Scott Turner. I am currently technically the Chief Deputy District Attorney at this point in time in the 5th Judicial District. And I am here on behalf of the 5th Judicial District, as well as the Colorado Prosecutors Association and the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance. And this bill does have their support. On July 7th of 2010, the citizens of the 5th Judicial District suffered a tragedy. A wonderful woman, who you'll hear much more about later, was killed by a stalker, somebody who had been stalking her for quite some time. And unfortunately, it took that tragedy to expose a gap in the system. And I think at this point in time, we have a duty as a society to try to fix that gap. This might have come from a tragedy, but unfortunately, this might be a good thing that comes from that tragedy. Essentially, with this bill, what we're trying to do is put stalking on par with domestic violence. Domestic violence has a procedure in order to protect the victims. And I think that procedure, maybe even more so than in some domestic violence cases, needs to be implemented for stalking cases. When the stalking statute was implemented in 1999 by this legislature, did the remarkable thing and made a legislative declaration about how serious stalking is, about the trauma, both physical and mental, that occurs on victims of stalking. And I think by bringing stalking on par with domestic violence, we can offer them that protection. Representative Devon, we mentioned about the difference between stalking and domestic violence. Essentially, domestic violence encompasses what's called an intimate relationship. That does not happen always in stalking. In fact, 75% of stalking victims do not have an intimate relationship with their stalker. And you'll hear that that occurred in this case. So I think it's a tragedy that had Bonnie Flores been in an intimate relationship with this stalker, she would have been offered these protections. But because she was not, because she was a happily married woman, she did not get these protections. So essentially, as Representative Hamner indicated, what we want to do is make it a mandatory arrest. But the police officer still has discretion in those circumstances. One of three things can happen: an arrest, and a summons, or an arrest warrant. So this simply takes the summons out of the equation and makes it an arrest. And I see my time is up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Waller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And sir, you keep alluding to the fact that there was a gap here, and a gap prevented, or a gap is what enabled, this horrible tragedy to occur. And I mean, you almost make it sound like the police officer's hands were tied and they couldn't arrest this stalker in this circumstance. But certainly the police officer, had they made the, for lack of a better term, correct value judgment in this case, absolutely could have made an arrest if they wanted to, right?
They could have, yes.
But they just, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
And so for whatever reason, the police officer just chose not to make the arrest.
Mr. Chairman.
That is correct, but the important part of this process is that's just the first part of the process. It leads into, at that point in time, once he does get arrested, then having the restraining order read to him and actually acknowledging the restraining order. As you know from the circumstances of this case, that is something that never happened. He was arrested after actually years of complaints of stalking, and then he immediately posted bond. And then 2 weeks later, he went and shot and killed the stalker before the victims ever had a chance to address the court and advise them of the seriousness of the situation, before the district attorney ever had a chance to let their voice be heard as to what should happen in this situation. So, yeah, they could have arrested him, but they didn't. But that's just the first start of this very important process to give the victims and the district attorneys a voice, and to make sure the defendant is aware of the consequences, if there is a protection order, what's going to happen if he does violate it, before he ever has a chance to get out of jail.